Hello to my wonderful family, and a warm welcome to all the beautiful people tuning in today. It's always a gift to share these moments and stories with you. Today, we have a story that touches on pride, prejudice, and the incredible power of a love that blossoms in the most unexpected of places. It asks us a question we should all consider. What is a person's true worth? Is it the uniform they wear, the money they have, or something deeper inside? Let's find out together. Before we dive in, I have a question for you all. Have you ever completely misjudged someone based on their job or appearance, only to find out they were the complete opposite of what you expected? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to read your experiences. And now, let's begin. The sharp crack of his hand against her cheek silenced the entire first-class cabin. To Captain Julian Croft, she was just a simple nurse who had stumbled into his world, an obstacle in his path. He couldn't know that he had just assaulted the daughter of Silas Thorne, a man whose quietest whisper could dismantle empires, and that this single, arrogant act was not an end, but a terrifying beginning. The world, for Captain Julian Croft, was a series of polished surfaces reflecting his own perfection. It was the gleaming marble of the terminal floor, the crystalline shine of the VIP lounge windows, the pristine white of his pilot's shirt, ironed to a knife's edge. At 34, Julian didn't just wear his uniform, he inhabited it. The 4 gold bars on his epaulets weren't just signifiers of his rank, they were extensions of his soul, a testament to a life spent clawing his way into the sky, far above the grubby disappointments of the earth below. He strode through the bustling terminal of JFK, a human ship parting the waves of travelers. Heads turned. A flight attendant from a rival airline offered a deferential nod. A young boy pointed, his face alight with wonder, whispering pilot to his mother. Julian absorbed it all like a solar panel, converting admiration into the fuel that powered his self-worth. He was a commander of a 90-ton machine that defied gravity, a modern-day god in a polyester blend suit. Inside the exclusive pre-flight crew lounge, he poured himself a black coffee, the aroma rich and dark. His co-pilot, a younger, eager man named Ben, watched him with a familiar mix of awe and apprehension. "Weather looks clear all the way to London, Captain," Ben said, his voice a little too loud in the quiet room. "Tailwind should put us ahead of schedule." Julian didn't look up from his tablet, where he was scrolling through flight analytics. "Ahead of schedule is the only schedule we have, Ben. Mediocrity is for ground crew." He said it without malice, a simple statement of fact as he saw it. The world was divided into 2 groups, those who soared and those who watched from below. His phone buzzed, the screen flashing a name that instantly soured the air, Admiral Croft. His father. Julian's posture stiffened. He turned his back to Ben and walked toward the window, overlooking the tarmac, his voice dropping to a low, tight frequency. "Father." Julian, the voice on the other end, was gravelly, clipped, and perpetually unimpressed. "Your mother tells me you're flying to London." "It's my job, yes." "A pity you couldn't make the regatta. Your brother took first place." Again, the Vanderbilts were there. The Astors, real titans. The implication hung heavy in the air. And then there's you, my son, the glorified bus driver. Julian's knuckles turned white around his phone. He could hear the faint clinking of ice in a glass, the distant sound of seaside laughter. His father, a retired Navy admiral, moved in circles of old money and inherited power that Julian's handsome salary could never penetrate. His entire career, his pristine uniform, His command, it was all a desperate attempt to earn a nod of respect that had never come. My passengers in first class are titans in their own right, Father, Julian said, his voice laced with a defensive edge. COs, senators. I'm responsible for their lives. A dry, humorless chuckle came through the line. Responsibility is one thing, Julian. Influence is another. Do try not to be late. It's unbecoming. The line went dead. Julian stared at his reflection in the window. The confident captain, the man-god of the skies, was gone. In his place was a small boy in a too-large uniform, desperate for his father's approval. He shoved the phone into his pocket, the bitterness coating his tongue. He would walk onto that plane and be the commander everyone saw, the man his father refused to acknowledge. He would demand the respect he was owed, from his crew, from his passengers, from the world. He would tolerate no inconvenience, no disruption, no challenge to his authority. It was all he had. 14 miles away, in the controlled chaos of the Bronx General Hospital emergency room, Amara Jenkins was losing a war against the clock. The air, thick with the smell of antiseptic and human fear, was a symphony of frantic noise, the insistent beeping of a heart monitor, the sharp cry of a child in pain, the rushed, clipped jargon of doctors shouting orders. Amara, dressed in simple blue scrubs, a stray curl escaping her tightly wound bun, was the calm at the center of the storm. Her movements were economical and precise, her voice a low, soothing balm in the maelstrom. Just breathe with me, Mrs. Garcia, nice and slow, she whispered, her hand resting gently on the shoulder of an elderly woman whose breath was coming in ragged, panicked gasps. That's it. We're going to take care of you. For the last 12 hours, she had been a whirlwind of compassion and competence. She had cleaned a wound for a terrified homeless man everyone else was avoiding, held the hand of a teenager who had just been told his leg was broken in 3 places, and deftly inserted an IV into the fragile vein of a dehydrated infant. This was her world. It wasn't polished or glamorous. It was real. It was visceral. It was a place where her actions had immediate, tangible meaning. Here, she wasn't Silas Thorne's daughter. She was just Amara. And she liked it that way. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, a persistent buzz she'd been ignoring for hours. She finally pulled it out during a rare 2-minute lull, seeing the name on the screen, Dad. A familiar cocktail of love and frustration washed over her. She stepped into a small, cluttered supply closet, the door sighing shut behind her, muting the ERI's cacophony to a dull roar. Hi, Dad, she said, her voice weary. Amara, my love. His voice was a deep, warm baritone that always sounded like it was coming from a leather armchair in a wood-paneled library. It was a voice that negotiated billion-dollar mergers and swayed global markets. To her, it was the voice that used to read her bedtime stories. You're not still at that place, are you? It's a hospital, Dad. And yes, I am. It was a rough shift. You work too hard, little bird. For too little. I don't understand why you insist on this charade. The word stung. It's not a charade. It's my life. It's what I do. I know, he sighed, and she could hear the genuine regret in his tone. He never understood, but he did try. Which is why you need a break. Remember that trip to London we talked about? For the gallery opening? The ticket is waiting for you. First class. The flight leaves tonight. Amara leaned her head back against a shelf of sterile gauze. Dad, I can't. I'm exhausted. I just want to go home to my tiny apartment and sleep for a week. Please, Amara. For me, it would mean the world to me to have you there. Just for a few days. See the exhibition. Let me spoil you a little. When was the last time you let me do that? The question was laced with a loneliness that always managed to break through her defenses. He had all the power in the world, but his only child kept him at arm's length, terrified of being swallowed by his shadow. Guilt pricked at her. He was right. She'd been so focused on carving out her own identity that she often forgot he was just a father who missed his daughter. Okay, Dad, she relented, a tired smile touching her lips. Okay, I'll go. Wonderful. The relief in his voice was palpable. My driver will pick you up from your apartment in 2 hours. Just get some rest on the plane, my love. When she hung up, Amara stared at the scrubs she was wearing. They were her armor, her identity. In a few hours, she'd be sitting in first class, a world she had intentionally fled, a world of privilege and judgment. She felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. She just wanted to be invisible, to get through the flight without anyone looking at her twice. She was just a nurse, tired after a long shift. That's all anyone needed to see. The driver who met Amara was exactly the kind of silent, stone-faced professional she expected. He didn't ask about the rumpled state of her travel clothes or the weary lines etched around her eyes. He simply took her single, scuffed duffel bag, held the door to a gleaming black sedan that smelled of wealth and lemon polish, and navigated the chaotic New York traffic with an unnerving calm. Amara leaned her head against the cool glass of the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and red. She felt like a fraud, a little girl playing dress-up in her father's world. The scrubs she had shed felt more real, more her, than any first-class seat ever could. Boarding was a blur. She moved through the priority lane like a ghost, her boarding pass the only thing that validated her presence. The entrance to the plane was a portal into another reality. The first-class cabin was an oasis of muted grays and soft lighting. Passengers were already settled in their private pods, sipping champagne from delicate flutes, their voices low and confident. They wore cashmere sweaters and designer watches. Amara, in her comfortable but worn joggers and a simple cotton t-shirt, felt their glances like tiny pinpricks on her skin. She clutched the strap of her duffel bag, her knuckles white. She found her seat, 2AA, a spacious pod by the window. It was larger than the entire supply closet she'd used for her phone call. She tried to stuff her duffel bag into the overhead compartment, but her muscles, sore and exhausted from her shift, protested. The bag was heavier than it looked, filled with nursing textbooks she'd forgotten to take out. It slipped, its corner catching a half-full glass of water perched precariously on the edge of the adjoining seat's console. The glass tipped, sending a cascade of ice-cold water onto the immaculate navy blue trousers of the man standing in the aisle. That man was Captain Julian Croft. He had just exited the cockpit for his final pre-flight walkthrough, a ritual he performed to project an aura of absolute command. He wanted every passenger in his care to see him, to feel the weight of his authority, to be reassured by his presence. He was a bastion of control in a world of variables. And now, there was a dark, spreading stain on his pristine uniform. A disruption, an imperfection. He looked down at the splotch of water, then up at Amara. His eyes, a piercing shade of Arctic blue, narrowed into slits. For a moment, it wasn't Amara he saw, but the embodiment of everything that irritated him: incompetence, untidiness, a lack of awareness. It was the sloppiness his father despised. It was a smudge on his perfect record, on his polished reflection. "Watch what you're doing," he snapped, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Amara's face flushed with mortification. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, fumbling for a napkin. "It was an accident. The bag just slipped." "An accident?" he scoffed, the sound dripping with condescension. He took a deliberate step closer, invading her space. The scent of his expensive cologne was overpowering. "Or are you just so out of your depth you can't manage a simple bag? People pay a fortune to be here. For peace, for professionalism, not to be inconvenienced by people like you." The insult landed, sharp and ugly. "People like me?" Amara's apology died on her lips, replaced by a flare of defiance. She was tired, she was out of place, but she would not be diminished. "I have a ticket, just like everyone else." Her defiance was gasoline on the fire of his insecurity. In her quiet strength, he heard a challenge to his authority. In her simple clothes, he saw a trespasser in his sanctuary. The Admiral's dismissive voice echoed in his head, "Do try not to be late. It's unbecoming. This woman, this incident, was a delay. A problem. A stain." He didn't think. He reacted. It was a primal, ugly impulse, born of a lifetime of feeling inadequate. He raised his hand. The sound was not loud, but it was sharp, a sickening crack that sliced through the hushed ambience of the cabin. It was the sound of skin meeting skin, of a line being irrevocably crossed. Time seemed to warp. The low murmur of conversation ceased. The gentle clinking of glasses stopped. Every head in the first-class cabin turned towards the source of the sound. Amara's head snapped to the side from the force of the blow. A fiery, stinging heat exploded across her left cheek. For a single, suspended moment, there was only the shock, a white-hot flash of disbelief. Her mind, trained to process trauma and injury in others, struggled to categorize what had just happened to her. Her hand rose slowly, not in a gesture of pain, but of clinical assessment, her fingertips gently touching the place where his palm had struck. She turned her head back to face him. There were no tears in her eyes. There was no hysteria. There was only a profound, bottomless well of stillness. She looked at him, her dark eyes clear and steady, and in their depths, Julian saw something that terrified him more than rage, a piercing, absolute clarity. She saw him. Not the captain, not the god of the skies, but the small, pathetic man underneath. The flight's head purser, a woman named Ingrid with silver hair and decades of experience in de-escalating the tantrums of the rich and powerful, was at Julian's side in an instant. "Captain," she said, her voice a low, urgent whisper, her body subtly positioning itself between him and Amara. Julian blinked, as if coming out of a trance. The heat of his anger was already being replaced by a creeping, icy dread. He looked at his hand, the one that had struck her, as if it belonged to someone else. What had he done? The faces of the other passengers were a gallery of shock and disapproval. He had lost control, here, in his domain. But weakness was a luxury he could not afford. He fell back on the only defense he knew, arrogance. "This passenger was creating a disturbance," he announced to the cabin, his voice tight but loud, projecting a command he no longer felt. He pointed a trembling finger at Amara. "She is acting erratically. She may be a security risk." Amara didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She simply held his gaze, her silence a more powerful indictment than any scream. The red mark on her cheek was a stark brand of his failure. "Sir," she said, and her voice was unnervingly calm, a nurse's voice, a voice used to speaking to people on the verge of panic. It cut through his bluster. "You assaulted me." Ingrid, the purser, spoke again, more firmly this time. "Captain Croft, perhaps you should return to the cockpit. We are scheduled for departure. Let me handle this." Julian looked from Ingrid's steely expression to Amara's unwavering eyes. He felt the eyes of every passenger on him. He had wanted their admiration. Now he had their judgment. He gave a curt, jerky nod, pulling his jacket straight, a pathetic attempt to restore his dignity. "Fine. Handle it." He turned and strode toward the cockpit, his back ramrod straight, not daring to look back. The heavy, reinforced door clicked shut behind him, sealing him in with his shame. He sank into his pilot's seat, the familiar leather feeling alien and unforgiving. "Everything okay, Captain?" Ben, his co-pilot, asked, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Fine," Julian clipped, avoiding eye contact. He busied himself with the pre-flight checklist, his hands moving through the motions with practiced ease, but his mind was replaying the scene in the cabin. The crack of the slap, the look in her eyes. He had assaulted a passenger, a woman. The consequences could be catastrophic. A report, an investigation, his license suspended. Everything he had built, this fragile monument to his own worth, could crumble. And worse, far worse, was the thought of his father finding out. The disgrace would be absolute. He had to contain this. He had to make it go away. Back in the cabin, Ingrid was a model of professional grace. She leaned in close to Amara, her voice a soft murmur. "Ma'am, I am so sorry. His behavior was inexcusable. Is there anything I can get for you?" "Some ice for your cheek." Amara finally looked away from the cockpit door, her focus returning to the here and now. She gave a small, shaky nod. "Ice would be good. Thank you." Another flight attendant quickly and discreetly brought a cloth-wrapped ice pack. Amara pressed it to her cheek, the cold, welcome shock that helped ground her. The other passengers began to whisper amongst themselves, some looking at her with pity, others with a subtle annoyance, as if she were the source of this uncomfortable drama. She wanted to disappear. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her. "Would you be more comfortable in another seat, perhaps?" Ingrid offered gently. "We could move you." "For your privacy." Amara thought about it. Part of her wanted to demand the man be arrested. Part of her wanted to get off the plane and run back to the anonymity of her life. But another part, the stubborn part that had been forged in the crucible of the ER, refused to be chased away. She had a right to be here. She would not be moved like a piece of inconvenient furniture. "No," she said, her voice regaining its strength. "I'm fine right here." Ingrid nodded, understanding the silent message. To move her would be to validate the captain's claim that she was the problem. She gave Amara's shoulder a brief, supportive squeeze. "All right. Please, let me know if you need anything at all." As the cabin doors were secured and the plane began its slow taxi to the runway, Amara leaned her head back and closed her eyes, the ice pack a cold anchor in a sea of humiliation. She felt like a specimen under a microscope. The man who had struck her was now in control of her life, flying her 35,000 feet above the ocean. The irony was suffocating. All she had wanted was to be invisible, and now she was the center of a silent, ugly spectacle. The engines roared to life, and the immense pressure of takeoff pushed her deep into her seat. As the lights of New York City receded below, shrinking into a glittering tapestry, Amara felt a profound sense of isolation. She had never felt more alone. The first few hours of the flight passed in a strained, artificial quiet. The flight attendants moved through the cabin with an exaggerated gentleness, their smiles tight, their eyes avoiding Amara's seat, as if it were radioactive. The other passengers kept to themselves, the earlier shock settling into a thick, uncomfortable silence. Amara didn't sleep. She stared out the window at the endless, inky blackness, the curve of the earth, a faint, glowing line on the horizon. The ice pack had numbed her cheek, but it couldn't numb the feeling of violation, the lingering sting of his contempt. People like you. The words echoed in her mind. Who did he think she was? A charity case? A stowaway? It was a judgment she had spent her entire adult life trying to escape, the assumption that her worth was tied to a bank account or a family name. By choosing to be a nurse, by living in a small apartment and driving a second-hand car, she had thought she'd made herself immune to that world. She had been wrong. Her phone, switched to airplane mode, lay on the console beside her. She picked it up, her thumb hovering over the photo gallery. She scrolled past pictures of smiling friends and ER colleagues to a photo taken last Christmas. It was of her and her father, standing in front of a ridiculously large Christmas tree in his palatial Manhattan penthouse. He had his arm around her, a look of immense, unguarded pride on his face. She looked happy, but also slightly uncomfortable, like a bird in a gilded cage. Silas Thorne, a name whispered with a mixture of fear and awe in boardrooms and government halls across the globe. A man who had built a technology empire from nothing, a visionary whose influence was so vast and so quiet that he made bombastic billionaires like Trump and Musk seem like noisy children. He was a kingmaker, a ghost in the machine of global finance and politics. He could ruin a man with a single phone call or build a new industry with a single idea. And he loved his daughter with a fierce, protective devotion that was the only vulnerability in his impenetrable armor. Amara looked at the photo and felt a sudden, hot surge of anger that had nothing to do with her father. It was anger at Julian Croft. He had no idea. He had no idea who she was, not in the way the world defined it. But more importantly, he had no idea who she was as a person. He had looked at her and seen nothing of value. The thought of calling her father, of telling him what happened, flickered in her mind. She could picture it, the quiet fury that would settle over his features, the cold, precise instructions he would give to his people. By the time they landed in London, Captain Julian Croft's career, his reputation, his life as he knew it, would be systematically and utterly dismantled. But she pushed the thought away. That would be her father's victory, not hers. It would be using the very power she had tried so hard to live without. It would prove Julian right, in a twisted way, that her only worth came from a man's name. No, this was her wound, her fight. She put the phone down, her resolve hardening. Here, in the quiet of the cabin, floating between two continents, a question surfaces, one that goes beyond this flight. When someone hurts you profoundly, is justice about retribution? Or is it about finding a way to reclaim your own dignity on your own terms? I'm curious to know what you, my online family, think about this. Let me know in the comments. Just as that thought settled, a sudden commotion from a few rows behind her broke the silence. A woman gasped. A man's voice, sharp with alarm, called out, "Somebody help. I think he's having a heart attack." Instantly, the cabin was electric with panic. Flight attendants rushed towards the source of the cry. Amara's head whipped around. She saw a small crowd gathering around a seat where an elderly man was slumped over, his face a ghastly shade of pale, his hand clutching his chest. Amara didn't hesitate. It wasn't a choice, it was an instinct. It was the same impulse that made her run towards a code blue, not away from it. The uniform didn't matter. The location didn't matter. The humiliation she had just suffered didn't matter. Someone needed help. She unbuckled her seatbelt and was on her feet in a second, moving down the aisle. "Let me through," she said, her voice calm and authoritative. "I'm a nurse." The words parted the small crowd like a magic spell. They turned to her, their faces a mixture of fear and relief. The flight attendants, who had been looking panicked themselves, stepped aside. "Sir? Sir, can you hear me?" Amara knelt beside the man's seat, her fingers immediately going to his neck to check for a pulse. It was there, but it was thready and erratic. His breathing was shallow. His skin was clammy. "My name is Amara. I'm a nurse. I'm going to help you." She looked up at the anxious face of the woman next to him, presumably his wife. "What's his name? Does he have a history of heart problems?" "It's Arthur," the woman sobbed. "Yes, he had a bypass 2 years ago. He has pills, nitroglycerin." "Okay, get them," Amara commanded gently, then turned to the nearest flight attendant. "Get me your emergency medical kit. Now, and the defibrillator. And tell the captain what's happening." Flight attendant, grateful for the clear instructions, scurried away. In the cockpit, Julian was staring grimly at the instrument panel, the plane on autopilot. He was trying to lose himself in the familiar comfort of numbers and procedures, but the image of Amara's face, the red mark on her cheek, was burned into his mind. The intercom buzzed. It was Ingrid. Her voice was strained. "Captain, we have a medical emergency in the first-class cabin. A passenger has collapsed. It looks like a heart attack." Julian's blood ran cold. A mid-air medical emergency was a pilot's nightmare. It meant protocols, diversions, a mountain of paperwork, and the potential for a death on his flight. It meant being late. It meant scrutiny. "Is there a doctor on board?" he asked, his voice all business. There was a pause. "Yes, Captain," Ingrid said, her voice now holding a strange new inflection. "We have a volunteer. She's a nurse. She's with him now." Julian felt a flicker of relief. "Good. Keep me updated on the passenger's condition. Let me know what she recommends." Another pause, this one longer, more deliberate. "Captain," Ingrid said, and he could almost hear her choosing her next words carefully. "The nurse. It's the woman from seat 2A. The world tilted. Julian stared at the cockpit door as if he could see through it. The woman he had assaulted. The inconvenience. The security risk. The simple, out-of-place person he had deemed worthless. That woman was now the most important person on his 90-ton aircraft. The life of a passenger, the fate of his flight, was in her hands. A wave of nausea washed over him. He felt Ben's eyes on him, but he couldn't look at his co-pilot. He couldn't let anyone see the crack in his facade. "Right," he managed to say, his throat tight. "Patch me through to her, if she needs to speak with me directly." Back in the cabin, Amara was a study in focused grace. She had helped administer Arthur's nitroglycerin pill under his tongue, and was now monitoring his vitals with the equipment from the medical kit. She had an oxygen mask on him, and was speaking to him in a low, reassuring voice, even as she gave crisp orders to the flight attendants, who were now her makeshift ER team. "His pulse is stabilizing a little, but his blood pressure is dangerously low," she said to Ingrid, who was kneeling beside her. "We need to land, as soon as possible. He needs a real hospital, not a first aid kit." Ingrid nodded and relayed the message to the cockpit. Julian received the information like a body blow. Divert the flight. It was the only choice, but it was a logistical and financial nightmare. It would mean landing in Shannon, Ireland, or Gander, Newfoundland, depending on their position. It meant upsetting the schedules of dozens of powerful people. It meant a full-scale investigation. And it meant he had to put his trust, his command, and his career in the hands of the woman he had publicly humiliated. He took a deep breath, the air in the cockpit suddenly feeling thin and recycled. He had to talk to her. He had to rely on her judgment. He keyed the intercom for the cabin announcement system, his voice strained and formal. "This is your captain speaking. We have a medical situation on board that requires our immediate attention. We will be diverting our course to land at the nearest suitable airport. The cabin crew will provide you with more information as it becomes available. In the meantime, we need to clear the aisle." Miss Jenkins, he said, having gotten her name from Ingrid, the name feeling foreign and heavy on his tongue. "The purser will connect you to the flight deck." A flight attendant handed Amara a headset. She put it on, her eyes never leaving her patient. A man's voice, the same voice that had dripped with contempt just hours earlier, now filled her ear. It was clipped, professional, stripped of all emotion. "Miss Jenkins, this is Captain Croft. What is your assessment?" Amara didn't acknowledge their history. She was a nurse, and he was the pilot. The roles were clear. "His name is Arthur," she said, her voice pure, cold prof. The descent was rapid. Julian handled the aircraft with a fierce, almost punishing precision. Every bank, every adjustment, every radio call to air traffic control was executed with the flawless competence he prided himself on, but it felt hollow. He was no longer a god commanding the skies. He was a chauffeur racing against a clock set by a woman he had wronged. The lights of Shannon, Ireland, emerged from the black canvas of the Atlantic like a sprinkle of scattered diamonds, a beacon of hope for one man on board and a symbol of utter failure for another. Amara never left Arthur's side. She was a fixed point of calm in the swirling anxiety of the cabin, her focus absolute. She monitored his breathing, spoke to his terrified wife, Margaret, and prepared the flight attendants for the arrival of the paramedics. The red mark on her cheek had faded to a dull, bruised shadow, but every time she moved her head, she felt a faint, phantom ache, a physical reminder of the collision of their two worlds. The landing was smooth, a testament to Julian's skill, but he felt no satisfaction. As the plane taxied towards a waiting phalanx of emergency vehicles, he unbuckled his seatbelt. Protocol dictated he remain in the cockpit, but he couldn't. He was being pulled by an invisible string, a need to see, to witness the outcome of the drama he had inadvertently set in motion. He opened the cockpit door and stood at the entrance to the cabin, watching. The main cabin door opened, and a team of Irish paramedics swarmed in, their movements brisk and professional. They took one look at the scene and immediately turned their attention to Amara, not as a bystander, but as a colleague. "What have we got?" the lead paramedic asked, his accent thick and lilting. Amara gave a clipped, perfect report. Vitals, history, medications administered, time of onset. She spoke their language. She was one of them. Paramedics nodded, impressed, seamlessly taking over the care of the patient. As they carefully maneuvered Arthur onto a stretcher, his wife, Margaret, her face streaked with tears, grabbed Amara's hand. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You saved his life. You saved my husband's life." Amara simply squeezed her hand back. "He's in good hands now. From his vantage point, Julian watched the exchange. He saw the genuine, life-altering gratitude in the older woman's eyes and the humble, quiet dignity with which Amara accepted it. It was a currency of respect he had never dealt in. His was earned through fear and rank. Hers was earned through compassion and skill. And in that moment, he felt a shame so profound it was like a physical weight in his chest. He had not just misjudged her, he had failed to see her at all. He had looked at a lifesaver and seen a nuisance. As the paramedics wheeled Arthur off the plane, Ingrid, the purser, approached Julian. "The airport authority will need to take statements, Captain. From you and from her." Julian's stomach tightened into a knot. He had to face her. Not as a captain to a passenger, but as a man to the woman he had assaulted. The remaining passengers were eventually deplaned and escorted to a private lounge to await news of a replacement flight. Chaos subsided, leaving behind an eerie silence in the cabin. There were only two people left, Julian, standing stiffly by the cockpit, and Amara, who was slowly gathering her things from seat 2A. She moved with a bone-deep weariness that had been there before any of this began. He walked towards her, each step feeling like a mile on unsteady ground. The polished floors now seemed to mock him, reflecting a distorted, lesser version of himself. He stopped a few feet away from her, the space between them charged with unspoken words. "Miss Jenkins," he began, his voice rough. She looked up, her expression unreadable. She didn't look angry. She didn't look scared. She just looked tired. He had prepared a dozen apologies in his mind, all of them sounding canned and inadequate. The Admiral's voice echoed in his memory. "Never show weakness, Julian. An apology is an admission of failure." But what else was this? He had failed. Utterly. "What you did back there," he finally managed, gesturing vaguely towards where Arthur had been. "It was remarkable. You saved that man's life." Amara zipped her duffel bag, the sound loud in the quiet cabin. "It's my job," she said simply. It wasn't a boast or a rebuke. It was a statement of fact, the same one she'd given her father, the same one that defined her. The simplicity of it disarmed him. "No, it's more than that," he said, struggling for the right words. He felt an overwhelming urge to explain himself, not to excuse his actions, but to make her understand the ugly, broken thing inside him that had lashed out. "What I did, when you boarded, there is no excuse for it. But I want you to know it wasn't about you." She finally gave him her full attention, her dark eyes searching his face. Who was it about, then? The question was direct, stripping away his defenses. He looked away, towards the small oval window, at the flashing lights of the emergency vehicles on the dark tarmac. "My father," he said, the admission barely a whisper. "He's an admiral, retired. All my life, nothing I did was ever good enough. Not becoming a pilot, not commanding the top international route. To him, I'm just a driver. He gets in my head." He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the first time all day. "When you spilled the water, it was just another imperfection, another failure. And I saw his face, heard his voice, and I reacted like a child. A spoiled, angry child." He looked back at her, his eyes pleading for something he couldn't name. Understanding, perhaps. Absolution. It was monstrous. And I'm sorry. I am truly, deeply sorry for hurting you. It was the first time in his adult life he had apologized with such raw, unvarnished sincerity. The words felt like they had been pulled from his very soul. Amara watched him, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. She had seen this before in the ER. Not the pilot, not the captain, but the man underneath. The bravado, the anger, it was almost always a shield for a deep and hidden pain. She recognized the wound of a child desperate for a parent's approval. It was a wound she knew intimately, albeit from the other side. She had spent her life running from her father's approval, while Julian had spent his life chasing it. She thought of her father, Silas Thorne. She thought of his power, his influence, the way the world bent to his will. She had a sudden, jarring vision of what would have happened if she'd made that call. Julian Croft wouldn't just be apologizing, he would be ruined. His career would be over. His life shattered, and he would never even know why. The image unsettled her. It felt like a gross imbalance of power, a kind of violence in its own right. "My father," she said quietly, her voice drawing him in, "thinks my job is a charade." Julian looked at her, confused. "What?" "He's successful. Very successful. He doesn't understand why his daughter, who could have anything she wants, would choose to clean up strangers' messes and work herself to exhaustion for a paycheck that he considers pocket money." She offered a small, sad smile. "He loves me. Terribly. But he doesn't respect my choices. He thinks my life is a waste of my potential." In that moment, the chasm between the first-class captain and the simple nurse vanished. They were just two people sitting in the strange limo of a grounded airplane in a foreign country who understood what it felt like to be fundamentally misunderstood by the one person whose opinion should matter most. A fragile, unexpected thread of connection formed between them in the silent cabin. An airport official appeared at the door then, his expression apologetic. "Captain Croft?" "Ma'am, we need your statements now." They were escorted to a small, sterile office in the airport terminal. The air smelled of stale coffee and bureaucracy. They gave their statements separately. Julian's was a carefully worded admission of an unprofessional interaction, glossing over the physical contact with sanitized language. Amara's was a simple, factual account of a medical emergency. When asked about the circumstances preceding it, she said there had been a disagreement. She never used the word assault. She never mentioned the slap. When it was over, they found themselves alone in a small, deserted waiting area designated for the crew. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a hollowed-out exhaustion in its place. "Why didn't you tell them?" Julian asked, his voice low. "You could have destroyed me. You still can. What good would that do?" Amara replied, sinking into one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs. "You'd lose your job. Arthur would still have had a heart attack. And I'd still have a bruised cheek. It doesn't change anything." She looked at him, her gaze direct. "Besides, ruining people is easy. It's what my father does." The statement hung in the air, loaded with a meaning he couldn't possibly grasp. But he heard the weariness in her voice, the disdain for a certain kind of power. "What will you do now?" he asked, changing the subject. "I was supposed to go to a gallery opening in London," she said with a humorless laugh. "Seems unlikely now. I'll probably just try to get a flight home." "No," Julian said, the words coming out before he could think. Let me fix this. The airline will arrange a hotel for you here. For us. Until they can get a replacement crew and plane. Please. Let me at least make sure you're taken care of. It's the least I can do." Amara hesitated. Part of her wanted to say no, to sever this strange, fraught connection completely. But she was exhausted, stranded in a country she'd never intended to visit. And there was something in his eyes, a desperate need for a chance at redemption, that resonated with her own deep-seated need to heal things. "Okay," she said quietly, "a hotel would be nice." The hotel was a quaint, charming inn in a small village a few miles from the airport. The airline, eager to contain the situation, had spared no expense. They were given rooms on the same floor, at opposite ends of the hall. The silence between their closed doors felt vast. Julian couldn't rest. He showered and changed out of his uniform, which now felt like a costume of a man he no longer wanted to be. Dressed in civilian clothes, a simple sweater and slacks he kept in his flight bag, he felt stripped down, vulnerable. He found himself pacing his room, the apology he'd given feeling insufficient. It was a start, but it wasn't enough. He walked down the hall and knocked gently on her door. Amara opened it a moment later. She had also showered, and her hair was damp, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She was wearing the same joggers and t-shirt as before. They looked less like a statement now, and more like just clothes. "I was about to order room service," she said, her guard up slightly. "Can I join you?" he asked. "I mean, not in your room. In the restaurant downstairs. I saw they had one. I'd like to buy you dinner." As a proper apology, she studied his face, seeing the genuine plea there. Against her better judgment, she nodded. "Okay, Captain." Dinner. The hotel restaurant was cozy and warm, with a crackling fireplace and a handful of quiet patrons. They sat at a small table in the corner. For a while, they just ate in silence, the clinking of their cutlery the only sound between them. It was Amara who broke it. "So," she said, setting down her fork. "A pilot who is afraid of his father." It's almost a cliché. There was no malice in her voice, only a gentle, probing curiosity. Julian managed a weak smile. "Is it? I suppose it is." He leaned forward, deciding there was no point in hiding anymore. He wanted me to be him. A Navy man. Command ships, not planes. When I chose a commercial airline, he called it the path of least resistance. He said I chose comfort over honor. "And you've been trying to prove him wrong ever since," Amara finished for him. "Every single day," he admitted. "Every perfect landing, every on-time arrival. I'm chasing a ghost. And yesterday, I let the ghost win." "We all have our ghosts," Amara said softly. She looked into the fire, the flames dancing in her dark eyes. "Mine is just richer than yours." She told him about her father then. Not his name, not the scale of his empire, but the shape of his love. She described a childhood of immense privilege and profound loneliness, of being surrounded by everything except normalcy. She told him how becoming a nurse, a person of tangible, immediate use to others, was her only way of feeling real, of building an identity that couldn't be bought. As they talked, the labels that had defined them, captain, nurse, assailant, victim, began to dissolve. They were just Julian and Amara, two people sharing their wounds in the warm glow of a foreign hearth. He saw the fierce intelligence and deep well of compassion she tried to hide behind a shield of professional detachment. She saw the frightened boy beneath his armor of arrogance, a man so starved for approval he had forgotten how to be kind. A fragile, tentative bond began to form. They found a strange humor in their situation, stranded together by a crisis of his making. He made a self-deprecating joke about his God complex, and she laughed, a real, genuine laugh that lit up her entire face. The sound startled him. It was beautiful. For a few hours, in that small Irish inn, it felt like healing was possible. The world outside, with its consequences and expectations, disappeared. There was only the fire, the quiet conversation, and the unexpected discovery of a kindred soul in the last person on earth either of them would have chosen. They were starting to see each other, really see each other, for the first time. After dinner, they walked back towards their rooms in a comfortable silence. At her door, Julian stopped. Amara, he said, the name feeling natural on his lips now. Thank you for talking to me, for not destroying me. Don't thank me yet, Julian, she said, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. You still have to fly me to London. He smiled back, a real, unforced smile. Deal. It felt like a truce, a new beginning, a moment of peace. But peace is a fragile thing. The next morning, Julian was woken by a sharp, insistent knock on his door. He opened it to find Ingrid, the purser, looking pale and stressed. Captain, she said, her voice low and urgent. You need to see this. She handed him her phone. It was open to a major news outlet's website. The headline was a gut punch. Istheatricule. Julian's blood turned to ice. He scrolled down. There was an anonymous eyewitness account, sensationalized and vicious. It painted him as a violent, arrogant monster who attacked a helpless woman for no reason. It mentioned his name. It mentioned the flight number. His carefully constructed world shattered in an instant. How? He whispered, his voice hoarse. One of the other passengers must have sold the story as soon as we landed, Ingrid said grimly. It's everywhere. The airline is in full panic mode. They're sending a corporate team. Julian, they're going to crucify you. His mind raced. His career was over. The disgrace, the public humiliation. It would be worse than anything his father could ever have imagined. And then a colder, more sickening thought hit him. Amara, what would she think? After their conversation, after the connection they'd made, would she believe he was nothing more than the monster the media portrayed? His phone rang. It was an unknown number with a London area code. He answered it, his hand trembling. Is this Captain Julian Croft? The voice was female, British, and sharp as a razor. Yes, this is Eleanor Vance from the Aero National Corporate Affairs Office. I'm here with our head of legal. We've been trying to reach the passenger, Miss Amara Jenkins, but her phone goes to voicemail. We need her statement. We need to know what her intentions are. Is she with you? She's in the room down the hall, Julian said numbly. Good. We need you to go to her. Find out if she's going to press charges. Find out what she wants. The company's position depends on her. Our offer will be substantial. Do you understand? Find out her price. Her price. The words were like acid. They wanted him to go to the woman he'd just shared his soul with and try to buy her silence. They wanted him to turn that fragile, beautiful moment of connection into a vulgar transaction. He felt a wave of self-loathing so intense it almost buckled his knees. This was his test. He could be the man from the night before, the one who was honest and vulnerable, or he could be the man they wanted him to be, a corporate tool, saving his own skin at any cost. He walked to Amara's door, his heart hammering against his ribs. He felt the weight of his father's disappointment the company's ruthless expectations, and the media's judgment all crashing down on him. When he knocked, it was with the fist of a condemned man. Amara opened the door, a cup of tea in her hand. She hadn't seen the news yet. Her face was calm, her eyes soft. She looked at him and smiled, a small, hopeful smile. "Good morning," she said. He couldn't meet her eyes. He couldn't find the words. The choice he had to make was tearing him apart. Pride or vulnerability? Avoidance or truth? He opened his mouth, but what came out was the voice of fear. The voice of the Admiral's son. "Amara," he said, his tone flat and businesslike, destroying the warmth between them instantly. "We need to talk. The airline knows what happened. They sent a team. They want to know what it will take to make this go away." He saw the light in her eyes die. The softness on her face hardened into a mask of disbelief, then dawning, sickening comprehension. The fragile bond they had built, the shared vulnerability, the moment of healing, it all shattered. She looked at him as if he were a complete stranger, as if the man from last night had been a mirage. "My price," she whispered, the word laced with a venomous hurt he had never heard from her before. "Is that what you came here to ask me? After everything we talked about, you think I can be bought?" Her face crumpled, not in sadness, but in a profound and utter betrayal. "I was wrong about you," she said, her voice breaking. "You're not a frightened boy. You're just a coward. You're exactly the man who slapped me on that plane." She stepped back and slammed the door in his face. The sound echoed in the silent hallway, a final, definitive crack. It was the sound of their connection being destroyed. It was the sound of his last chance, gone forever. He stood there, alone in the hallway, the lowest he had ever been, realizing he had just broken the one thing that might have saved him. The slammed door was a gunshot to Julian's soul. He stood in the hallway of the quiet Irish inn, the echo of her words, coward ricocheting in the hollow space where his hope had been. Julian looked at their cold, expectant faces. He thought of Amara's shattered expression. This was his reckoning. This was his choose who he was going to be for the rest of his life. The Admiral's son, or the man Amara had briefly seen by the fire. He pushed the suspension papers back across the table. "Her name is Amara Jenkins," he said, his voice quiet, but ringing with a newfound authority that had nothing to do with his rank. "She is a nurse. She saved a man's life on my flight. And I assaulted her, not had an interaction with her. I slapped her across the face in a moment of pathetic, arrogant weakness. And a few minutes ago, I insulted her again by implying her dignity was for sale." The two executives stared at him, nonplussed. "And no," Julian continued, standing up, "she does not have a price. You are not going to offer her a settlement. You are not going to try and buy her silence. You are going to issue a public apology. To her, you will state that Captain Julian Croft acted unconscionably and has been suspended. You will state that Miss Jenkins acted with heroism and grace. You will do this because it is the truth. And if you don't, I will hold my own press conference, and I will tell the entire world not only what I did, but that my airline tried to cover it up by bribing a hero." He was no longer afraid. The worst had already happened. He had lost her respect, and in doing so, he realized it was the only thing that mattered. His career, his father's approval, it was all dust. Before Eleanor could respond, the conference room door opened. Amara stood there. She looked from the stunned executives to Julian, who was standing tall, his face a mask of grim resolve. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Amara said, her voice calm and clear. My name is Amara Jenkins. I believe you've been looking for me. She walked into the room and sat down at the table, placing her hands calmly on its polished surface. She looked directly at Eleanor. I will not be pressing charges against Captain Croft, and I will not be accepting any financial compensation from Aeronational. My silence is not for sale. Julian's heart stopped. He stared at her, unable to comprehend what he was hearing. What I want, Amara continued, her gaze shifting to Julian, is a face-to-face apology. Not from the airline. From him. Eleanor Vance looked from Amara to Julian, a flicker of confusion and then cunning calculation in her eyes. No lawsuit. No payout. This was a miracle. Of course, she said quickly. Captain Croft will be happy to... Alone, Amara cut in, her eyes still locked on Julian. The two of us. And then I will consider this matter closed. The executives, practically giddy with relief, quickly agreed and scurried out of the room, leaving Julian and Amara alone. The silence that fell was heavy, but it was different now. It was the silence of a coming dawn, not a tomb. Julian slowly sat back down, his entire body trembling with the aftershock of his decision and the shock of her arrival. Why? He whispered, his voice cracking. After what I did, what I said. Why are you doing this? Because of what you just did, she said softly. I was outside the door. I heard you. She gave him a small, weary smile. It seems I was wrong about you. You're not a coward. You were just lost. I know what that's like. He finally met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw no arrogance, no fear, only a deep, profound remorse and a glimmer of the decent man she had glimpsed the night before. Amara, he said, and her name was a prayer. From the bottom of my soul, I am sorry for hurting you, for disrespecting you, for failing to see you. You are the most honorable person I have ever met. I am ashamed of the man I was on that plane. The apology was raw, real, and untainted by any motive other than repentance. It was the truth. And in that truth, the final pieces of the wall between them crumbled. I accept your apology, Julian, she said. The resolution wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet, momentous exchange in a sterile conference room in Ireland. It was about two people choosing vulnerability over pride and integrity over expedience. 6 months later, the London Gallery was buzzing, a kaleidoscope of colorful art and sophisticated chatter. Amara moved through the crowd, a glass of champagne in her hand, feeling more at ease in this world than she ever had before. She was here for the opening of a new exhibition her father had sponsored. He was across the room, holding court, but every few minutes his eyes would find hers, and he would give her a small, proud smile. Their relationship had changed since that day in Ireland. Her quiet strength had earned a new kind of respect from him, one that went beyond paternal love. He had started to see her, not just as his daughter, but as her own woman. She felt a gentle touch on her arm. She turned, and her heart gave a familiar flutter. I was hoping I'd see you here, Julian said. He looked different. The sharp, severe edges were gone. He wore a simple, well-fitting suit, but it was his eyes that had changed the most. The Arctic blue was warmer, calmer. He was smiling a genuine, easy smile. I wouldn't miss it, she replied, smiling back. How are you, Julian? I'm well, he said. Really well. His suspension had lasted 3 months. 3 months of internal review, therapy, and deep self-reflection. When he was finally reinstated, it was on a probationary basis, flying domestic routes. He had accepted it with humility. The biggest change, however, had been with his father. After the story broke, Julian had called the admiral, expecting a tirade of disappointment. Instead, after hearing the whole story, the real story, his father had been silent for a long time before saying, "Well, son, it seems you finally learned the meaning of honor. It's not about never falling. It's about how you get up." It was the closest to a compliment he had ever received. "And Arthur?" Amara asked. "The man from the plane?" "Fully recovered," Julian said, his face lighting up. "He and Margaret sent me a Christmas card. They sent one for you too. I have it with me." He had kept in touch with them, and he had kept in touch with Amara. After Ireland, their emails had been tentative at first, then more frequent. They talked about their days, their families, their ghosts. They rebuilt their connection, not on the drama of a crisis, but on the quiet, steady foundation of mutual respect and a shared, strange history. He looked at her, standing there so poised and beautiful, a woman who moved effortlessly between the grit of an ER and the glamour of an art gallery. He remembered the crack of his hand against her cheek, the sound that had shattered his world and, ultimately, remade it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn object. It was a simple, smooth stone from the beach near the inn in Shannon. "I picked this up the day we left," he said, placing it in her palm. It was cool and solid. To remember. Not the mistake I made, but the choice I made because of it. The choice you gave me. Amara closed her hand around the stone, its weight a comforting anchor. She looked at him, at the man who had caused her so much pain and had, in turn, become the catalyst for her own growth. Theirs was not a storybook romance. It was something realer, forged in fire and rebuilt with patience and forgiveness. It was an unexpected love, born from a moment of ugliness that had revealed a hidden beauty in them both. "So, Captain," she said, her eyes sparkling with a light he now knew so well. "Where are you flying to next?" "I'm not sure," he said, his gaze holding hers. "But for the first time in my life, I feel like my feet are on solid ground. And I'm ready to go anywhere." He didn't have to say the rest. They both knew the journey wasn't about destinations anymore. It was about the person you chose to fly with. And looking at her, he knew his flight plan was finally, wonderfully clear. As we leave them here, on the edge of a new beginning, we're left with one final thought. What do you believe is the true measure of a person's character? The mistakes they make under pressure, or the way they choose to mend what they've broken? Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey today. Your presence here makes this community what it is. I can't wait to see you all in the next story.